Guys, so I'm outside the prison here, just outside San Diego in California, not very far from Mexico, actually. This is where Erik and Lyle Menendez have been, and this is where the parole hearing was, where the parole board decided not to grant Erik Menendez parole. They basically pushed it off for 3 more years. So we'll have another opportunity for parole in 3 years. Erik and his brother Lyle Menendez, of course, are where they were convicted of killing their parents, Kitty and Jose, back in 1989, shooting them with shotguns right in their den. They have said that Jose, the dad, molested them, and that was the reason that they shot and killed the parents, and that the mom knew that it was happening. But ultimately today, the parole board decided no parole for Erik Menendez. Lyle Menendez's hearing will be on Friday. And the parole board ultimately saying at the end of the day that it wasn't even so much about the crimes, partly about the crimes, but it was also about Erik Menendez's disciplinary history in prison, which was pretty extensive. I'm going to get into it in this episode. Basically, we got notes throughout the day that we had to keep secret during the day, but I'm now able to go through all of those notes of exactly what happened in the parole hearing, every little detail I'm going to give you in this episode of Brian Entin Investigates. Hey guys, all right, so let me walk you through what happened here. First of all, if you're wondering what this is, it's my hoodie blocking the sun. It is so insanely hot here and sunny. We're right along the Mexico border where this prison is, and there's just like no shade whatsoever. So all my stuff doesn't overheat, and I don't overheat. I put my hoodie up, so that's why that is right there. But basically, there's a pool reporter inside who's been sending us notes, which we're not allowed to report until the decision came. And I just want to read them all to you because this is really the only way anyone will know what actually happened during the entire hearing. So when I say Barton, keep in mind that Barton is the parole, he is the parole commissioner. So Barton's the parole commissioner, and then obviously Erik is Erik Menendez. So Barton notes Erik M. Qualifies under elder parole laws. Erik is 54 years old. He's served approximately 35 years in a California state prison. Barton raises Erik M. had been involved in criminal behavior prior to the murders. Erik M. says he committed a burglary at age 17. It began as a prank, he says, with a couple of other people at a party, and it escalated and became a serious instance. I wanted to impress them, and I was very immature, and I made very poor decisions, and I ended up hurting those individuals that I burglarized, Erik said. I was not raised with a moral foundation. I was raised purposely without the moral foundation that I should not do wrong when I know the difference between right and wrong. I was raised to lie, to cheat, to steal in a sense, an abstract way. When I was playing tennis, my father would make sure that I cheated at certain times if he told me to. The idea is that there is a right and wrong, and that I do not cross between. It's a moral bound that was not instilled in me as a teenager. Says he's developed a moral guardrail as part of his journey in prison. Erik M. described his character defects as involving moral failings. I was dishonest, I was angry, I was in a codependent relationship with my brother, I was impulsive, I was entitled, I would violate the rules if I believed that it would benefit me. I did not trust authority, I didn't trust my relatives, I lived in an isolated household, we were trained not to go outside the household, I had deep character failings. I kind of wanted to stick it to my dad. I was in a very difficult relationship with my father, and I was dealing with a whole nother issue with him in terms of my relationship with him, and I was resisting him in ways that I could, and doing the burglary was one way that I could resist him and sort of be really violate his rules, and there's nothing that he could do about it. But you murdered him because you thought there was something he was going to do to you, Barton asks. Yes, Erik M. confirms Jose took him out of the will. Loyalty in my family was secrecy, he said. Erik talks about Jose breaking the law, bragging about not paying taxes, killing the family dog, which I had heard about. The Tuesday before the murders, Erik said he saw an incident between Kitty and Lyle. He went to the guest house and broke down, but there was no talk about doing anything to my parents. The talk was, you're coming back to Princeton with me. Erik says he told Lyle the sexual violence was still going on. This is all him talking to the parole board. Lyle believed he could take Erik away from the abuse when that did not work, and his confrontation with Dad turned very bad on Thursday night, and that was the first talk of buying guns. The talk of buying guns was not let's buy guns and kill them. The talk of buying guns was it had now become very dangerous, and I had broken the one rule my father told me never to break. Erik says that Tuesday conversation was the first time they'd ever discussed their father's sexual abuse against them. Lyle and I were raised purposely to not talk to each other about emotional or traumatic things. He said talking about something like that was considered a great weakness, Erik said. Now, the purpose was to use the guns if my dad, when talked about getting the guns, I had made the decision that I was never going to let dad come in my room and do that again, Erik told the parole board. In my mind, leaving meant death. There was no consideration. I was totally convinced there was no place I could go, Erik said. Barton, again, the commissioner, parole commissioner, notes that Erik was 18 at the time and could have left home, gone to family members who would have taken him in. It's very difficult to convey how terrifying my father was, he said. I fantasized about my father not being alive, but the idea of me walking into a room and pulling the trigger, my father was the most terrifying human being I'd ever met. Barton again asks Erik why he didn't leave or go to the authorities as opposed to obtaining firearms. What kept you in the house, they asked him. He said, my absolute belief that I could not get away. Maybe it sounds completely irrational and unreasonable today. Barton acknowledges he gets learned helplessness concept of sexual assault victims. Is there any part of this you believe was self-defense, Barton asks, and Erik says no. That's significant. Erik said that it was not self-defense. My purpose in getting the guns was to protect myself in case my father or my mother came at me or to kill me, or my father came in the room to rape me. Sorry, my car turned off and it's really hot, so I gotta turn it back on. Where was I? That is why I bought the guns. Erik says he purchased 2 guns, one for me and one for Lyle. Our lives were in extreme danger immediately once Erik and Lyle broke the secret of Jose's alleged abuse, according to Erik. He said, Lyle came to the top of the stairs after my dad ordered me to the room and said he was coming up. My focus was dad's coming to my room. I can't let him come to my room. Lyle said, it's happening now. Erik said, my gun is in my room. I ran to my room to get the gun. All I knew as I had to get to the den, fear was driving me to that den. Dad was going to come to my room and rape me that night. That was going to happen one way or another. If he was alive, that was going to happen, Erik said to the parole board. Erik says he got the gun, went to the car, loaded it before Lyle could. I didn't even wait for Lyle. I knew I had to get to the den. You do see that there were other choices at that point. This is what the Commissioner Barton said. When I look back at the person I was then and what I believed about the world and my parents, running away was inconceivable. Running away meant death. Says Jose had trained me to believe that running away meant death. Notes even as far back as when Erik was 12, Jose would let him go away to tennis tournaments with no fear he'd report the abuse. You would have to live my experience to understand. If my dad exited that den, I was dead. And Barton then asked, why kill mom? And he says, when mom told me that she had known for all those years, it was the most devastating moment in my entire life. It changed everything for me. I had been protecting her by not telling her, Erik says, who notes that Kitty saw Jose whip him. Barton asks if Kitty was also Jose's victim, and Erik says she definitely was his victim. He was beating her because I failed, Erik said. If you have this burning hatred towards your dad, you had no thought about rescuing your mom at all, Barton asked. Erik says he believes his mom was just egg Jose on. References finding one of the Kitty's suicide notes a few years earlier. Lyle asked mom to leave with them. Kitty responded that Jose was a great man and she would never leave. Some of the notes are a little off. Step by mom had known she was united with my dad, but when I found out that she knew about the abuse, Erik says he no longer saw one daylight between his parents. On that night, I saw them as one person. Had she not been in the room, maybe it would have been different. I wish to God I did not do that. So he says he wishes he didn't do it, Erik said, of reloading and shooting his mother. You're not fine. No one would be fine after discussing this, Barton, the commissioner, says, offering Erik a break. Erik was visibly emotional, not crying, but emotional. Barton asks about the brothers' actions after the shootings. Did it ever occur to you that maybe you're putting other people in danger by just disposing of the guns? And Erik says, no, they dumped the guns off the highway. Barton notes anybody could have found them. He asks Erik about the spending sprees. I was torn between hatred of myself and what I did and wishing that I could undo it and trying to live out my life, making teenager decisions. I bought a Rolex, an incredibly callous act to make myself feel more like a man, Erik said. I had no plan for my life. I didn't know what to do with my life. My only plan for my life was to play tennis. After you'd gotten away with it, were there more discussions about keeping it quiet, they asked. I couldn't go to Lyle with the pain that I was in. I couldn't talk to Lyle about this personal anguish that I could not live with what I'd done. He says he did not speak to Lyle about the spending, refers to buying the Jeep as a conservative purchase. Barton brings up Erik's confession to therapist Dr. Ozell. Barton notes that Erik continued to do things to thwart being prosecuted while in custody, even after confessing. And Erik denies doing anything to try to set up an alibi for the murder. He says Lyle wrote Erik a long letter asking him not to testify about the sexual abuse. He did not want the secrets exposed. He thought that would be like killing my parents again, Erik said to the board. The only alibi we had were two people who said we weren't with them. We must have been somewhere else. We couldn't manufacture an alibi after the fact. I was genuinely doing my best to tell the truth and did. I testified about the reloading, which I did not have to. There was no evidence. I did my best to testify truthfully about what I did and did not do. Then Barton opened up the discussion what he called risk areas. He said Erik says his risk areas are criminal thinking, substance abuse, violence, anger, impulsivity, cell phone use. He says he has a relationship plan and acknowledges concerns about codependency. Barton said he wants to go over prison conduct. We recognize that you've served a lot of time, even as horrific as these murders are. They are not necessarily the thing that would convince them Erik is a risk to public safety. Barton asked if Erik developed more sociality after coming to prison. Erik says in the first decade, absolutely. Barton says Erik's record is replete with diverse violations, including violence, manipulation, misuse of things. You have criminal acts. Barton says in 1997, Erik was 26 or 27. In March 97, there was a write-up for doing personal letters on a work device. Barton asks what character defect that depicts. And he said entitlement, disobeying authority, laziness. I could go on, Erik says. April 97, there's a write-up, Erik for lying, manipulating CDCR staff, involving use of visiting room per Barton. Erik says the incident involved him going into the chapel, incident of excessive physical contact with the visitor. Similar incident happened in 2006 with his current wife. I was pushing the line occasionally in the visiting room with my wife because I was attracted to her and we had sexual feelings for one another and we had no way to really express those, and it's difficult to be next to a woman that I love and I'm attracted to and want to be with, and I can only hold her hand. It was a lapse in judgment. This was not something I did every day. Barton says the woman's 9-year-old daughter was there, asks why that didn't provide deterrence. Erik says they were not being sexual and that they were not engaging in sexual activity. Daughter was reading a book while Erik and the woman were snuggling. She rubbed his inner thigh. My daughter was across the table reading the book and my wife and I were snuggling. It was poor judgment. It was not intended to harm the child, Erik said. In November 97, Barton says Erik has a fight with someone called Mr. Brown. Erik says he could have avoided the physical altercation. While he struck me first, I acted aggressively with him. I did not de-escalate the event. I escalated it through my behavior. Barton describes the 1998 memo where an inmate named Quarles is described as an enemy of Erik, that there were concerns about them being on the yard together. Barton describes a cell search that resulted in a seizure of art supplies, wax candles, which all would have been contraband in 99. Erik says most of it was his, but he took the blame for all of it. Erik said he had paint rollers and tape to paint the cell. A lot of these things that you're involved in, you don't go to the next level to think about what the consequences are, Barton says to Erik. Barton says about a time when supplies to make prison wine were found in Erik's cell. Erik references also trying heroin in 1998. Generally, Erik says he didn't care for alcohol, says he was allergic to heroin. Erik says generally in prison, if he used drugs or alcohol, it was miserable and feeling hopeless due to his life without parole status. If I could numb my sadness with alcohol, I was going to. I would have taken other drugs to numb that pain. I was looking to ease that sadness within me, Erik said. In 1999, Barton says Erik was placed on temporary non-contact status with his wife for aggressive behavior. Another violation, spray paint, was found in Erik's cell in 2002. When I went into the cell, because I'm a life without parole, I knew I could spend the next 5 to 10 years there, so I tried to repaint it, put up shelves, make it like a home. Barton points out the issue is how Erik obtained the spray paint. Erik says he bought it from someone on the yard and smuggled it into his cell. 2003, Barton says he found a Bible with a cutout in Erik's cell. Erik says it was a Christian book, not the Bible. Tobacco was inside, wrapped in cellophane, so it wouldn't go stale. Erik admits this was criminal thinking. 2005, Erik was transferred to Pleasant Valley from Folsom. Barton asks about a hunger strike. Erik says he was placed under a lot of restrictions regarding where he could live or who he could live with because of possibility of misuse of a state computer in the past facility regarding typing of a personal manuscript. That isolated him in one building in an extremely violent prison. He went on a hunger strike, leading to someone high up in CDCR to come negotiate with him. There was a violation for Erik not taking properly prescribed medication, which led to him lose visitation rights for 6 months. Barton also asked about Erik's request to live in the same facility as Lyle. Barton says Erik was asked about his prior relationship with his brother in 2016, and Erik told staff he and Lyle never had any problems. Barton says this is a lie. Erik references Lyle molesting me as a kid, says he withheld that from CDCR staff. Interesting. Barton asked about Erik doing things for the 2-5ers. Unclear what that is, but a prison gang. By 2016, a lot changed for me in 2013. Says he'd been moved to Richard J. Jonathan Correctional Facility away from the above referenced gang. Says he hadn't seen his brother in quite some time and wanted to be closer to family. Rummel and Barton argue over Barton's characterization that Erik lied by withholding the details of Lyle molesting Erik as a child from CDCR. Says he was not required to tell CDCR every single detail of their relationship when it was generally good. Barton raises a fight between Erik and someone named Mr. Farmer. Erik classifies it as self-defense. I was guilty of mutual combat. I fought back, Erik said. Barton is critical of Erik because the report says he continued to attack Farmer on the ground. Erik says this person swung at him. He grabbed his arm, hit him in the back of the shoulder, and pinned the man on the ground. Erik said he was simply restraining the man so he'd stop punching him. Barton raises an allegation of Erik duping multiple inmates into buying him drugs, which he didn't pay for, leaving the debt on cellmates and friends after he was transferred to another prison. He said, my roommate Melvin had a lot of debt that I was trying to help him pay off. I was using the canteen. I was negotiating. Barton asked about a tax fraud scam in or around 2013. The 2-5 was running the yard, and they were in charge of the tax scheme of the yard. And the guy they had filing out the forms was released, so they came to me, and I jumped at the opportunity, he said. Erik says his closest prison friends had recently been stabbed and raped, respectively, and it was an extremely violent yard that I was trying to survive. I was in tremendous fear. When the 2-5ers came and asked for help, I thought this was a great opportunity to align myself with them and survive, Erik said. Erik said he didn't personally control any of the checks that was involving the tax scam. When he was transferred to one of the checks went missing. Erik said the 2-5ers blamed him. Suddenly, I was being called an informant. I was being told that I stole money that wasn't true. Barton references a 2019 confidential debrief from another inmate where Erik invited someone into his cell to smoke marijuana. He says those gang members smoked marijuana. Erik says an incident when a package was sent to him from El Cajon containing used markers stuffed with marijuana was sent purposely to get Erik in trouble. He didn't receive it, and the board didn't sustain any violation. He notes that Menendez is sent a lot of mail from as a high-profile inmate. Let's see. Barton references an Erik roommate from 2005 to 2013 who complained to staff that Erik wanted this person assaulted. Erik denies this, and they point out that was unfounded. Barton brings up reports that they had access to cell phones. Erik had stated he's rented phones from people, but Erik says he never rented phones out. He did let other people use their phones. I was in a community of people using phones, so it was someone that I trusted or someone that I knew. I had a phone. I didn't want to tell him no. Says he lived in a 6-man dorm. At one point, Erik and Lyle were moved to the same facility. They both had phones, but Erik denied them sharing a phone. Said his notoriety led to people always wanting to know if he had phones. Said he didn't truly believe he had any chance of leaving prison until the end of 2024. What I got in terms of the phone and my connection with the outside world was far greater than the consequences of me getting caught with the phone, he said. In November 2024, now the consequences mattered, he said. He had an in-depth conversation in 2025 and took a criminal thinking class. He learned a lot more about the impacts of his cell phone decision. He said he was using the phones for connection with my wife, watching YouTube, listening to music, watching movies, porn, anything you could do on a phone, I did. Barton says he's concerned how many of Erik's support letters discuss how much of a model inmate he's been because he believes that minimizes the seriousness of his cell phone violations. Says he started to go through the clemency process in March 2025. I had a wake-up call and was living differently. When he realized he had the chance to get out, Erik said his consequential thinking kicked in. I can't be doing this. I don't know how people know they're going to be on the I don't know how people know they're going to be to the board in 4 or 5 years could be doing this. Says he paid $1,000 per phone. He paid $1,000 per phone. Erik says he got the money from a friend who was paroled pre-COVID. Barton expresses concern that someone who paroled him helped Erik with a criminal act. Barton questions Erik about sprawling impact of phone use again, as it logically meant a CDCR staffer had to bring a phone in, that a prison gang may have benefited by taxing the import on the phone. I knew of 50, 60 people that had phones. They were just available. I justified it by saying, if I don't buy it, someone else is going to buy it. The phones were going to be sold, and I longed for that connection. All right, so the updates continue now. You might be wondering why I'm in a different shirt. I had to change into a button-down shirt because I had to do my News Nation hit. But let me continue reading you the latest now that we got. So, Barton asks Erik why he stopped using drugs. I didn't like who I was when I was using drugs. I wanted to make significant changes in my life. I had been in the mindset that I did not want to use drugs anymore. Erik says on October 14th, 2023, I made a commitment to my mother. That was my mother's birthday, that he would stop using drugs. I never want to use again. I will never use again, and I will honor that commitment that I made in October 2013. Barton asks why Erik waited so long to use the cell phones. Erik says it was an issue of access. Erik continues to talk about his cell phone use in terms of addiction. And then Commissioner Stern took over questioning. She asked Erik why he thought it was still worth it to use the cell phones once the resentencing process had begun. Erik again repeats the comments about he hadn't woken up to the consequences, which obviously far outweighed the punishment. Erik said if anything, he wanted to use the phone to get more information about how or if the DA was really going to pursue resentencing. He admits that he was more motivated by consequence than morality with regard to phone use. Rachel points out other family members could have provided him that information. He also had access to television to see the news. One of the driving factors for me was the desire to have private conversations, he says, noting CDCR staff were listening to his approved prison phone calls and letters and expressed concern that anything he said would be reported to the DA's office. Stern asks how Erik's wife felt about him using a contraband phone. By calling her on the phone, I did damage to my relationship with her. She felt it was immature, and I was not being smart by using the phone, Erik says, noting that he is the reason he lost his family visits. Stern says he lost family visits for 3 years as a consequence. Stern says Erik has done gobs of programming and that listing all of it would take until next week. Stern talks about Erik's relapse prevention plan for anger management. Erik says he was angry, if not rageful, at my dad for coming into my room and not letting me go to college, at my mom for knowing that night, yes, I was terrified for my safety, but I was also angry, and anger was part of my childhood throughout my young adult life. The anger at my mother was incredible. I felt incredibly betrayed by my mother in that last week, he said. Recalls a moment when Jose was whipping him and he just looked at his mother, who did not intercede. On the night of the murder, Erik said anger exploded out of me, and I can't imagine being angry at my mom now. I wasn't angry an hour afterwards. As I've grown, I've realized just how severe the trauma was that she experienced, I'm sorry. Erik talks a lot about his relationship with God, dealing with toxic shame, says he even had to repeat a mantra, you're worthy, you're loved, you're good enough, over and over before the hearing. Says he had to admit the phone violation in a group he was running. I can't do anything in this facility without people knowing it. Says he's terrified and wakes up in cold sweats about some of the violations as they come out in this hearing, such as the tax scam issue, possibly destroying his credibility in the male sexual assault survivor community. Stern asked about Erik's work with a hospice group, talks about work with life inmate named Thomas, a World War II veteran with a conviction for unspecified sexual violence. Erik talks about his experience, highlighted to him that there's a lot of bullying of the elderly in prison, who he said were very alone and uncared for. Says he created this life care and hospice group. We've heard about this group that he created. Erik recently graduated from UCLA in June. Stern asks about the boundaries with Lyle. Erik says he now stands up for himself, that he doesn't put his older brother's needs ahead of his own. They tend to do different programming, don't facilitate classes together or share clothing. Erik says Lyle is respectful of those boundaries. Then attorneys started asking clarifying questions. Begins to direct questions through Barton. Balian wants to know about a witness named Tracy Baker who testified that Kitty Menendez tried to poison the family at a dinner. Balian asks if Erik knew Lyle wrote a script for her to testify to that. Erik says he was unaware. And then it goes on. Asked if Erik believed his mother was going to kill him. Yes, please understand that I'm trying to reason it through my brain as an 18-year-old at the time. One of the things that was exploding in my mind was my dad is going to come up to my room and rape me. My brain was not processing in any capacity to have logical or rational thought. Erik, who also said his mom bought a gun the year before and said she was going to kill somebody. Bailey tries to talk through Kitty, begging for her life, saying no before the final shot, but Barton dismisses that as irrelevant. So they kind of went back and forth here. And Balian brings up the idea of the killing being staged as a mafia hit. Barton says it's irrelevant. I'm not going to play that game, Mr. Balian. It's not relevant to me that he's corrected the record. Barton says of Balian asking questions that imply Erik committed perjury during the trial. Okay, so then Heidi Rummel began questioning Erik, began questioning her client. She asked Erik about Erik's resistance to Jose's behavior. Resistance to my dad was how I retained my sanity, he said. Says sometimes he drowned his food in lemon to reduce my taste buds to semen. Referred to himself as Hurt Man sometimes. Rummel asks how Erik's life changed in 2013. Erik says faith was a fundamental component. Being a prisoner, it's not an excuse, but it is a devastating sentence. Hopelessness in prison is devastating, Erik says, to rationalize some of his prison behaviors and violations. Rummel asks when the last time Erik was tempted to go outside of his moral guardrails and how he handled it. Erik said it happened last week. He said he wore his full prison outfit despite it being very hot because he didn't want to engage in entitled behavior. It's not that I don't have the thoughts, it's how I catch them. Erik describes his journey through the prison system as a journey into hell, referring to the level 4 high security yard, Pleasant Valley. He says being away from Lyle may have played a part in his drug use, as Lyle is heavily anti-drug. Rummel asks about Erik's relationship with Lyle in prison, says he was ashamed to tell Lyle about his drug use, his tax fraud issues with the 2-5 gang, and the cell phone use. Erik says they're serious accountability partners now. If we have an inch or fall into a trigger, we discuss it with each other. Barton begins questioning Erik if Lyle introduced him to cell phone use or vice versa, and Erik says no. Rummel says what Jose or Kitty would think of Erik, but Barton says it's irrelevant. His father's opinion of him has no relevance to me whatsoever. Seeing my crimes through my family's eyes has been a huge part of my evolution and growth, Erik said. Just seeing the pain and suffering, understanding the magnitude of what I've done, the generational impact. And he talked about the pain he put his aunts and uncles through, and says, I've called it a forever crime. It'll impact every generation to be born. I cannot express sorrow and remorse enough. Doing it for the rest of my life will not be enough. And then Balian, who's the prosecutor, said, I don't know that it's possible to state the people's position in 10 minutes because they only got 10 minutes. No doubt Mr. Menendez has sat in many classrooms and earned many achievements. No doubt he's made many pro-social efforts to improve himself. We don't dispute that. We applaud it. We hope that he one day achieves redemption. But the real question is, did he learn in all those classes the most important lesson of all? Does he understand the full severity and depravity of his conduct? Balian questioned if Menendez's behavior is calculated to get a result here. Says much of Menendez's improvements is solely motivated by having a chance to be released. To justify killing his mom at trial, he had to claim self-defense because any purported sexual abuse would not legally justify the killings. He's on the Lyle Baker script again regarding the allegation that Kitty tried to poison the family. Said that reading Erik's testimony about this poisoning allegation into the record says it matches the Lyle script closely, and now claims Erik lied to the parole board today and minimized his accountability. Again, revisits the idea that Erik was asking about the status of the competing will within 24 hours. Talked about the spending spree, so they're trying to show that he shouldn't be released. He never accepts anything. He had to create a fake, false self-defense narrative, a narrative he continues pushing today. Then attacked the self-defense motive and brings up the original prosecution theory of greed, fiscal motivation. Says he's on the road. He's not there yet. He doesn't have insight into his crimes. When what you've done is shotgunned your parents to death, deleted any compelling wills, taken their money, spent their money, you're a violent person. Is he truly reformed, or is he just saying what he wants to be heard? He is not reformed. He is not still an unreasonable risk to society. He has no insights into his crimes. So that's what the prosecutor said. Then there was a closing argument by Erik's attorney, which I won't read the whole thing. But basically said that this is the first time him and all his relatives have been together in 35 years. Talks about how far they've come. He sees trauma in the younger generation of his family, people who weren't even alive when the murders happened, even if they don't. I'm sorry, that was part of Erik. Let me get to Erik's closing statement, because it says the closing statement from his attorney basically says Mr. Menendez is so so far from the person he was when he had committed the crime, basically saying he's not dangerous, all the trauma that he's been through. Um, and then she said, never have I been in a hearing where so many family members who know him so well and who knew what happened in that house and who loved his parents have gone so far out of their way to support his release. And then Erik gave a closing statement, which I want to read you this in full because obviously this is important. Says that this is the first time he and many of his relatives have all been together in 35 years. Yesterday was August 20th, 1989. It was a dark day that I killed my parents. Today is August 21st. Today is the day that all of my victims learned my parents were dead. So today is the anniversary of their trauma journey. Erik talks about how he and his brother have been the center of this story for 36 years, and that always disturbed him because this crime is about my family. It's about what they've endured, what they've suffered, what they've gone through, and that's not about me at all. The real impact is them. Erik says he sees trauma in younger generations of his family, people who weren't alive when the murders happened, even if they don't. Erik talks about how this has caused divisions and disassociation in the family through the constant media attention. I just want my family to understand that I am so unimaginably sorry for what I have put them through from August 20th, 1989 until this day and this hearing. I know that they have been here for me and they're here for me today, but I want them to know that this should be about them. It's about them, and if I ever get the chance at freedom, I want the healing to be about them. Don't think it's the healing of me, it's the healing of the family. This is a family tragedy. All right, so it's been a long day out here outside the prison here in California. Lyle Menendez will be next for his parole hearing. I'll keep you guys posted on what happens there, and I'll talk to you guys later.